Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Discovery. Marco Allen stood in the sterile brightness of St. Mary's emergency room. His jaw clenched as he watched Dr. Patricia Henley examine his 7-year-old son Austin's head wound. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his weathered face, highlighting the crow's feet that spoke of too many years in the construction business and too many sleepless nights lately. "Dad, my head really hurts," Austin whimpered, his small fingers clutching Marco's calloused hand. "I know, buddy. The doctor's going to make it better," Marco said softly, though his voice carried an edge that made the nurse glance up nervously. Dr. Henley finished her examination and turned to Marco with a troubled expression. "Mr. Allen, I need to ask you some questions about how Austin sustained this injury. The pattern of the wound is concerning." Marco's dark eyes narrowed. He'd noticed the blood on Austin's pillow that morning when he'd gone to wake his son for school. Marla, his wife of 10 years, had already left for her supposed early morning yoga class, something that had become frustratingly routine over the past 6 months. "He fell down the stairs last night," Marco said carefully, watching the doctor's reaction. "Hit his head on the banister." Dr. Henley nodded slowly, making notes. "Mr. Allen, the injury pattern doesn't match a fall. This appears to be from blunt force trauma, possibly from a cylindrical object. I'm required by law to report this to Child Protective Services and the police." Marco felt a cold fury building in his chest, but his expression remained carefully neutral. 20 years of running his own construction company had taught him to keep his emotions in check, especially when dealing with incompetence or betrayal. "Doctor, I understand your protocols. Do what you need to do." 30 minutes later, Detective Roberto Tanner arrived. He was a tall, lean man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Marco recognized the type. He'd dealt with enough investigators over the years when construction accidents occurred on his job sites. "Mr. Allen, I'm Detective Tanner. Can you walk me through what happened last night?" Marco crossed his arms, his muscular frame tense. "Like I told the doctor, Austin fell down the stairs around 8:30. Hit his head pretty hard. My wife cleaned him up, put him to bed. We thought he was fine." "Where's your wife now?" "At work. She's an administrative assistant at Morrison Financial downtown." Marco's voice carried no emotion, though internally he was calculating. Marla's story about working extra hours lately had grown thin, especially considering the firm's managing partner, Julian Good, had called the house last week looking for her when she was supposedly working late. Detective Tanner studied Austin, who was now drowsy from the pain medication. "Son, can you tell me what happened to your head?" Austin's eyes were unfocused, but he managed to speak. "Uncle Donnie was playing with Mom in her room. They were making loud noises. I went to ask for water, and the door was locked. I hit my head on something when I tried to look through the keyhole. The silence in the room was deafening." Dr. Henley looked confused, but Detective Tanner's expression sharpened immediately. Marco felt the familiar rage that had been simmering for months suddenly crystallize into something cold and calculating. "Uncle Donnie?" Detective Tanner asked gently. "Mommy's friend. He comes over when Daddy works late." Marco's hands slowly curled into fists. "Donnie Kaiser. You should have known. Marla's old college friend who'd been hanging around more frequently, always with some excuse about needing advice or wanting to catch up. The bastard had been coming to his house, playing house with his wife while he was breaking his back to provide for his family." Detective Tanner looked at Marco. "Mr. Allen, I think we need to have a longer conversation. Can you call your wife and ask her to come down here?" "Of course," Marco said, his voice deadly calm. He pulled out his phone, noting it was 11:30 a.m. If Marla was really at work, she'd answer immediately. If she was with Donnie, the phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Marco tried again. Same result. "She must be in a meeting," he said to Detective Tanner, though they both knew better. Dr. Henley had stepped away to make her own calls. When she returned, her expression was grave. "Mr. Allen, I've spoken with the hospital social worker. Given the circumstances, we need to keep Austin here for observation and further evaluation. Child Services will need to investigate before he can go home." Marco nodded slowly. "I understand. Detective, are you treating this as a criminal investigation?" At this point, we're investigating potential child endangerment. If there's evidence of abuse or neglect occurring in the home. Detective Tanner let the implication hang. Marco's mind was already working 3 steps ahead. This wasn't how he'd planned to discover the full extent of Marla's betrayal, but perhaps it was better this way. The legal system would provide him with tools he could use. Documentation, evidence, official records. Detective, I want to cooperate fully. If someone hurt my son, I want them held accountable. I appreciate that, Mr. Allen. I'll need you to come to the station later today to give a formal statement. In the meantime, try reaching your wife again. As the detective left and the medical staff continued their evaluation of Austin, Marco stepped into the hallway and called his foreman, Julius Lynch. Julius, I need you to handle the Riverside project today. Family emergency. Everything all right, boss? It will be, Marco said grimly. But I'm going to be tied up for the next few days. Maybe longer. After hanging up, Marco stood in the hospital corridor, his mind racing. 20 years ago, when he'd started Allen Construction from nothing, his grandfather had given him a piece of advice. Boy, there are 2 kinds of men in this world. Those who get mad and do something stupid, and those who get mad and do something smart. Be the second kind. Marco had built his business on that principle. When suppliers tried to cheat him, he didn't get angry. He got even, methodically and completely. When competitors tried to undercut his bids with shoddy work, he didn't just complain. He documented everything and used it to destroy their reputations. Now, standing in this hospital hallway with his son's blood on his conscience and his wife's betrayal burning in his chest, Marco Allen began to plan. But this wouldn't be about getting even. This would be about total annihilation. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Aaron English, a private investigator he'd used years ago when he suspected one of his project managers was stealing. Aaron had been thorough, discreet, and ruthless in his investigation. Aaron, it's Marco Allen. I need your services again. But this time, it's personal. Chapter 2, Unraveling Threads. The Allen family home on Maple Street had always been Marco's pride. He bought the 2-story colonial 15 years ago when Allen Construction first turned a real profit, and he'd personally overseen every renovation and improvement. The wraparound porch, the oak hardwood floors, the custom kitchen with granite countertops, all of it represented years of back-breaking work and careful saving. Now, as he stood in his living room at 6 p.m., waiting for Marla to come home, the house felt like a monument to his own stupidity. Aaron English sat across from him, a compact man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the demeanor of someone who'd spent too many years watching people's secrets unfold. His preliminary report lay open on the coffee table between them. How long has this been going on? Marco asked, his voice carefully controlled. From what I could determine, about 8 months. It started as coffee meetings, progressed to lunch dates, and then Aaron consulted his notes. The first hotel receipt I found was from 6 months ago. Marco picked up one of the photographs Aaron had provided. It showed Marla and Donnie Kaiser entering the Riverside Inn, a mid-tier hotel about 20 minutes from their neighborhood. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, a day Marco remembered working late on the Westfield Shopping Center project. Tell me about Kaiser, Marco said. Aaron flipped through his file. Donnie Kaiser, age 34. Works as a regional sales manager for Cumberland Pharmaceuticals. Divorced 3 years ago. Pays alimony to his ex-wife Tiffany Gibson. Lives in a downtown apartment. Drives a leased BMW. And has approximately $43,000 in credit card debt. Debts, Marco mused. What kind of debts? Gambling, mostly. Casino records show he's a regular at the riverboat. Lost big last month. Nearly $20,000 in one weekend. He's also behind on his alimony payments. Marco absorbed this information silently. A gambling addict with money problems, sleeping with his wife. The pieces were beginning to form a picture. What about their pattern? When do they meet? Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, usually between 2 and 5 p.m. Sometimes Friday mornings when you're on job sites. They've been careful, but not that careful. Kaiser's been texting her constantly. Aaron handed over a thick stack of phone records. I have a contact at the phone company. These are Marla's text logs for the past 3 months. Marco scanned the messages, his jaw tightening with each exchange. Can't wait to see you today. M is working late again. When are you going to tell him? This sneaking around is killing me. Soon, baby. Just need to figure out the right time. I love you more than anything. We deserve to be happy. The final message was from yesterday, just hours before Austin's injury. House is empty until 9. Come over. Marco set the phone records down and walked to the window, looking out the street where he'd taught Austin to ride his bike just last summer. How did my son get hurt? Aaron's expression grew uncomfortable. For what I can piece together, Kaiser was at your house yesterday evening. Your son apparently tried to interrupt them and hit his head on something when he was trying to see into the locked bedroom. Probably the doorknob or the edge of a hallway table. And they just put him to bed? With a head injury? It appears so. Kaiser left around 9:30, according to the neighbor's security camera. Marco closed his eyes, fighting the urge to put his fist through the wall. His son had been hurt because 2 selfish adults couldn't keep their hands off each other, and they'd been too caught up in their own pleasure to properly care for an injured child. There's more, Aaron said quietly. Kaiser has been pushing Marla to file for divorce. He wants her to ask for alimony and half the assets. Based on their conversations, they're planning to move in together once the divorce is finalized. The front door opened, and Marla's voice called out, "Marco, are you home?" Marco turned to Aaron and spoke in a low voice. "I want everything. Every hotel receipt, every text message, every photograph. I want you to dig into Kaiser's finances, his gambling debts, his ex-wife situation. I want to know what he owes and to whom. Marco, whatever you're planning. I'm planning to protect my son and my assets. Nothing more." Marco's smile was cold. For now, Aaron gathered his files and slipped out the back door as Marla entered the living room. She looked tired, her blonde hair slightly disheveled, and Marco noticed she was wearing the same outfit she'd had on that morning. Not exactly what he'd expect from someone who'd supposedly been at work all day. "How's Austin?" she asked, setting her purse down. "I got your voicemail about the hospital. I was in meetings all day and couldn't get away." Marco studied his wife of 10 years. Marla had been beautiful when they'd met. She still was, in a carefully maintained way that spoke of regular salon visits and expensive skincare products. But looking at her now, he realized he'd been seeing only what he'd wanted to see for months. Austin has a head injury. They kept him overnight for observation. Marla's face showed appropriate concern, though Marco noticed she didn't ask for details about how the injury occurred. "Oh my God, is he okay? What happened?" "The doctors think someone hit him. They called the police." He watched her carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or fear. Marla's expression flickered for just a moment. Surprise, then calculation, before settling back into concerned innocence. "Hit him? Marco, that's terrible. Who would hurt a child? That's what the police want to know. Detective Tanner will probably want to talk to you tomorrow. They're investigating everyone who had access to the house yesterday." Now he saw real fear in her eyes. I was at work until almost 6 yesterday. You know that. Actually, I called Julian Good this morning to ask him to give you time off for the family emergency. Funny thing, he said you haven't worked late a single day this month. In fact, he said you've been leaving early most days. The silence stretched between them. Marco could see Marla's mind racing, trying to formulate an explanation that would hold water. "I've been running errands," she said finally. "Doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, things for the house." "What kind of doctor's appointments?" "Female issues. You wouldn't understand." Marco nodded slowly. "I'm sure. Well, the police will want to verify your whereabouts yesterday evening. They're being very thorough." Marla's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and quickly put it face down on the coffee table, but not before Marco caught a glimpse of the name, Donnie. "I should probably call the hospital," Marla said, reaching for the house phone. "Check on Austin." "Good idea. I'll make dinner while you do that." As Marla spoke to the hospital staff, Marco watched her performance. She played the concerned mother perfectly, asking all the right questions, expressing all the appropriate emotions. If he hadn't known better, he might have been convinced. But he did know better now. After Marla went upstairs to change clothes, Marco picked up her cell phone. It was password protected, but he'd seen her enter the code countless times. Austin's birthday. The phone unlocked immediately. The most recent messages were from Donnie. Did you hear from the police? We need to talk. This is bad. What if the kid remembers more? What if he tells him I was there? Meet me tomorrow at the usual place. We need to figure this out. Marco memorized the messages, then deleted them. Let Donnie wonder why Marla wasn't responding. As he prepared dinner, Marco's mind worked through the possibilities. The police investigation would eventually clear him of any wrongdoing, but would also create a paper trail documenting Marla's lies and inconsistencies. Aaron's investigation would provide additional evidence of the affair. But evidence of adultery wasn't enough. Not for what they'd done to Austin. Not for the months of lies and betrayal. Marco had built his construction business by thinking like an architect, seeing the entire structure before laying the first foundation stone. Now, as he planned his revenge against his cheating wife and her lover, he began to envision a different kind of construction project. He was going to systematically destroy both of their lives, piece by piece, until nothing remained but rubble. And just like his construction projects, it would be built to last. Chapter 3. Foundation Work. The next morning, Marco sat in the sterile interview room at the police station, his hands folded on the metal table as Detective Tanner reviewed his notes. Through the one-way window, he could see the parking lot where construction workers hurried to their job sites, unaware that their boss was planning the most important project of his career. Mr. Allen, I appreciate you coming in voluntarily, Detective Tanner said. Walk me through Tuesday evening one more time. Marco had rehearsed this moment. I got home around 7:15. Marla was in the kitchen making dinner. Austin was playing in the living room. We ate around 8, watched some TV, and put Austin to bed around 8:30. Marla and I watched a movie until about 10, then went to sleep. And you didn't notice anything unusual about Austin's behavior? He seemed tired, but that wasn't unusual. He'd had soccer practice after school. Marco paused, letting calculated concern show on his face. Detective, should I be worried about my wife? She's been different lately. Working late, secretive about her phone calls. Detective Tanner's pen stopped moving. Different how? Distant. Defensive when I ask about her day. Yesterday, when I tried to call her at work about Austin's injury, she didn't answer for hours. When she finally came home, she seemed more worried about covering her tracks than about her son. It was a careful balance, planting seeds of doubt without appearing to actively blame his wife. Marco had learned long ago that the best way to destroy someone was to let them destroy themselves. Mr. Allen, I have to ask, have you had any suspicions about your wife's fidelity? Marco let surprise and hurt flash across his face. What are you saying? Austin mentioned someone named Uncle Donnie being at your house. Do you know who that might be? Donnie Kaiser, Marco said slowly. He's an old friend of Marla's from college. He's been coming around more lately, but I thought. He trailed off, letting the implication hang. You thought what? I thought he was just being friendly. Going through a divorce, needed someone to talk to. But if you're suggesting... Marco's voice hardened. Detective, if that son of a bitch has been in my house with my wife while I'm working to support my family, I want to know about it. Detective Tanner leaned back in his chair. Mr. Allen, I need you to stay calm. We're still investigating. Calm. Marco stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. My son is in the hospital because someone was too busy screwing around to watch him properly. And you want me to stay calm? Sit down, Mr. Allen. Marco sat, but his hands remained clenched. I'm sorry. It's just, if Marla's been lying to me, if she's been putting Austin at risk. He shook his head. What do you need from me? Permission to examine your home, particularly the master bedroom and hallway where Austin was injured. We also need your wife's phone records and any security camera footage you might have. You have my full cooperation. I want the truth. After the interview, Marco drove to the hospital to check on Austin. His son was awake and alert, the head wound properly bandaged. The social worker, a thin woman named Kelsey Ward, was interviewing him when Marco arrived. Daddy, Austin reached for him, and Marco felt genuine emotion tighten his throat. Hey, buddy, how are you feeling? Better. The nurse gave me ice cream for breakfast. Kelsey Ward looked up from her notepad. Mr. Allen, I've been talking to Austin about Tuesday night. He's been very helpful. Marco sat on the edge of the hospital bed. What did you tell Miss Ward, Austin? I told her about Uncle Donnie's car in our driveway, and how Mommy told me not to bother them when her door was locked, and how I hit my head trying to see through the keyhole because I wanted water. The social worker made more notes. Austin, can you describe Uncle Donnie's car? It's blue and shiny, like Batman's car, but smaller. A BMW, Marco thought, just like Aaron had reported. Mr. Allen, Kelsey Ward said, I need to speak with your wife this afternoon. When would be a good time? She should be at work. Morrison Financial downtown. Though, Marco hesitated, playing his part. She's been having some personal issues lately. If she seems defensive or evasive, that's probably why. Another seed planted. That afternoon, Marco met with Aaron English at a coffee shop across from Morrison Financial. Through the window, they could see the building where Marla supposedly worked. I've been digging into Kaiser's finances, Aaron said, sliding a folder across the table. This guy's in serious trouble. He owes money to some very unpleasant people. Marco opened the folder and whistled softly. The documents showed gambling debts totaling nearly $60,000, including $30,000 owed to a loan shark named Malcolm Rosales, who operated out of the casino district. Rosales isn't just a loan shark, Aaron continued. He's connected to organized crime. Word is, Kaiser has missed 2 payment deadlines. Rosales has been asking questions about his assets, his job, his personal life. What kind of timeline is Kaiser working with? He needs to come up with $20,000 by next Friday, or Rosales starts getting creative about collecting. And get this, Kaiser's been telling people he's expecting a big windfall soon. Something about a business opportunity. Marco studied a photograph of Malcolm Rosales, a heavy-set man with cold eyes and scarred knuckles. Has Kaiser mentioned Marla to any of these people? Not by name, but he's been talking about his rich girlfriend whose husband owns a construction company. He's apparently told several people that she's going to leave her husband and they'll split the assets. The pieces were falling into place beautifully. Marco could see the entire structure now. How to use Kaiser's debts, Marla's greed, and the police investigation to create a perfect storm of destruction. I need you to do something for me, Marco said. I want you to approach Malcolm Rosales. Tell him you represent someone interested in Kaiser's situation. Someone who might be willing to provide information about Kaiser's assets in exchange for certain considerations. Aaron raised an eyebrow. Marco, that's dangerous territory. I'm not asking you to threaten anyone. I'm just suggesting that Rosales might appreciate knowing that Kaiser's rich girlfriend is married to someone who doesn't appreciate being cheated. And what exactly do you want Rosales to do with that information? Marco's smile was cold. Whatever comes naturally. That evening, Marco returned home to find Marla pacing the living room. Her phone pressed her ear. She was speaking in urgent whispers, but hung up quickly when he entered. How's Austin? She asked, attempting normalcy. Better. The social worker had some interesting questions for him. Marla's face went pale. What kind of questions? About Tuesday night. About who was at the house. About Uncle Donnie's blue car in our driveway. The phone in Marla's hand started buzzing. She glanced at it and declined the call, but Marco had seen the name. Donnie. Marla, we need to talk. Marco, Sit down. She perched on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting together. Marco remained standing, using his height and presence to create psychological pressure. The police are going to want to interview you tomorrow. They're going to ask about your whereabouts Tuesday evening, about your relationship with Donnie Kaiser, and about why you lied about working late. I didn't lie. I called Julian Good. He told me you haven't worked a single late day this month. He also told me you've been using sick days and personal time without telling me. Marla's phone buzzed again. This time she turned it off completely. The social worker is also going to want to talk to you. She's particularly interested in why Austin was unsupervised long enough to injure himself. Why our bedroom door was locked. Why a 7-year-old boy was trying to look through keyholes instead of asking for help. Marco moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. But what really interests me, Marla, is why my wife of 10 years would risk our son's safety to fuck her college buddy in our bed. Marla's composure finally cracked. Tears started flowing, and she buried her face in her hands. Marco, I'm sorry. I never meant for Austin to get hurt. It just happened so fast, and we thought he was okay. The word hung in the air like a blade. Marla realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. So Kaiser was here, in our house, in our bed, while our son was injured and bleeding. Marco, please. How long? What? How long have you been fucking him? Marla flinched at his tone. 6 months. But Marco, it's not what you think. I love him. We won't be together. Marco nodded slowly. I see. And what exactly did you think would happen? That I'd just hand over half of everything I've worked for, so you could play house with some gambling addict? Gambling addict? Marco, Donnie doesn't gamble. Marco almost smiled. Even now, she was defending the man who was using her. Marla, your boyfriend owes $60,000 to a loan shark. He's been telling people that his rich girlfriend is going to solve all his problems. The color drained from Marla's face. That's not true. Ask him yourself. Better yet, ask Malcolm Rosales. Marla's phone, despite being turned off, somehow started ringing. The sound was impossible, but in her panicked state, she didn't notice. She turned it back on and saw 17 missed calls from Donnie. Call him, Marco said. Right now. Ask him about his debts. With shaking hands, Marla dialed Donnie's number. Marco could hear the panic in Kaiser's voice even from across the room. Marla, thank God. We have a problem. Some guys came to my apartment asking questions about you, about Marco. They know about us. Marla looked at Marco with growing horror. What guys? I don't know, but they knew everything. They knew about the hotel, about Tuesday night, about Austin getting hurt. Marla, I think your husband hired someone. Marco watched his wife's world collapse in real time. The phone call continued, with Kaiser begging her to meet him, to run away together, to access Marco's accounts immediately. Finally, Marla hung up and looked at her husband with a mixture of fear and resignation. What do you want? She whispered. Marco sat down across from her, his expression calm and controlled. I want you to understand something, Marla. You and your boyfriend just made the biggest mistake of your lives. You put my son in danger. You violated my home. You tried to steal my assets. He leaned forward, and now you're going to help me destroy him. Chapter 4. Setting the Trap. Marco's office at Allen Construction overlooked the warehouse where his crews stored equipment and materials. The morning sun cast long shadows across stacks of lumber and steel beams. But Marco's attention was focused on the conference table where he'd spread out the blueprints for his revenge. Julius Lynch, his foreman, sat across from him reviewing work schedules. At 55, Julius was one of the few people Marco trusted completely. They'd worked together for 12 years, and Julius had never once given Marco reason to doubt his loyalty. Boss, the Riverside project is 2 days ahead of schedule, Julius reported. The electrical contractors want to start early if we can accommodate them. Good. What about the Westfield job? Material delivery is scheduled for Thursday. We'll need the crane for the steel work. Marco nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. His phone had been buzzing all morning with messages from Aaron English, Detective Tanner, and most importantly, Malcolm Rosales' people. The trap was beginning to close. Julius, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. The older man looked up from his papers. Shoot, if someone was stealing from this company, embezzling money, or selling information to competitors, what would you want me to do about it? Julius's weathered face hardened. I want you to bury them. This company is our livelihood. Marco, anyone who betrays that deserves whatever they get. What if it was someone we trusted? Someone close to the family? Makes it worse, not better. Julius leaned forward. Marco, what's going on? Marco made a decision. Marla's been cheating on me. The man she's sleeping with has gambling debts, and he's planning to use her to access our assets. I think they might try to go after the business accounts. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Julius spoke. What do you need me to do? For now, just keep everything running normally. But I may need you to make some changes to our security procedures, our bank access, things like that. Consider it done. After Julius left, Marco called Aaron English. Where do we stand with Rosales? He's very interested in your situation. Apparently, Kaiser's been bragging about his rich girlfriend for weeks. Rosales wants to meet with you tonight. Set it up. But Aaron, I want insurance. I want you recording everything, and I want backup nearby. Marco, are you sure about this? These aren't people you play games with. I'm not playing games. I'm solving problems. That afternoon, Marco drove to the hospital to visit Austin. His son was being discharged the next day, but the social worker wanted one more interview to ensure the home environment was safe. Kelsey Ward met him in the hallway outside Austin's room. Mr. Allen, I've completed my preliminary investigation. While we haven't found evidence of deliberate abuse, there are serious concerns about supervision and safety protocols in your home. What kind of concerns? Your wife's interview yesterday was problematic. She was evasive about her whereabouts Tuesday evening, and her story about Austin's injury kept changing. She also became very agitated when I asked about Mr. Kaiser. Marco nodded gravely. Miss Ward, I want to be completely honest with you. I believe my wife has been having an affair. I think she's been bringing this man to our house while I'm at work, and I think Austin was hurt because they were too distracted to properly supervise him. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Allen. I have evidence. Phone records, hotel receipts, witness statements. Detective Tanner has copies of everything. Kelsey Ward made notes. If that's the case, what are your plans regarding custody of Austin? I want full custody. I want supervised visitation for Marla until she can prove she's not putting our son at risk. And I want a restraining order keeping Kaiser away from Austin permanently. I'll include those recommendations in my report. After visiting with Austin, Marco drove across town to meet Malcolm Rosales. The meeting was at a warehouse in the industrial district, the kind of place where legitimate businesses operated during the day and other kinds of business happened after dark. Rosales was exactly what Marco had expected, a thick-set man in an expensive suit with eyes that calculated profit and loss in human terms. Two large men flanked him, but they remained silent throughout the conversation. Mr. Allen, I understand we have a mutual interest in Mr. Kaiser's situation. Marco kept his expression neutral. Mr. Kaiser owes you money. He's been claiming he'll pay you with assets that belong to me. I thought you should know that those assets aren't available to him. How much does he owe you? He doesn't owe me money. He owes me for sleeping with my wife in my house while my son was injured and bleeding. Rosales smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. A matter of honor. A matter of justice. What kind of timeline are we working with, Mr. Allen? Marco pulled out a folder containing copies of Marla's phone records and hotel receipts. My wife will be meeting with her lawyer next week to discuss divorce proceedings. Kaiser is expecting her to ask for alimony and half of my assets. He's told her the money will solve all his problems. And will she get that money? Not a penny. But Kaiser doesn't know that yet. Rosales studied the documents. This is very thorough, Mr. Allen. Very professional. I'm a detail-oriented person. What exactly are you proposing? Marco leaned forward. I'm proposing that you let Kaiser believe he's about to come into money. Let him think the divorce settlement will pay his debts. Then, when he realizes there's no money coming, you can collect your debt however you see fit. And in exchange, I'll make sure you have detailed information about Kaiser's actual assets, his employment situation, his daily routine. Everything you need to make an informed collection decision. Rosales was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Allen, you're asking me to wait for money that may never come. I'm asking you to wait for money that definitely won't come. The difference is you'll know that in advance, and you can plan accordingly. And what happens to your wife in all this? Marco's expression hardened. My wife made her choice when she decided to fuck another man in my bed while my son was bleeding in the hallway. She'll face the consequences of that choice. Rosales extended his hand. Mr. Allen, I think we could do business. As Marco drove home, his phone rang. It was Marla, and she sounded terrified. Marco, something's wrong. Donnie called me. He said men came to his workplace asking questions. His boss wants to see him tomorrow morning about irregularities in his expense reports. Marco pulled into his driveway before responding. What kind of irregularities? I don't know. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, things like that. Marco, they're going to fire him. Maybe they should. Marla, did it ever occur to you that your boyfriend might be using company money to pay for your hotel rooms? The silence on the phone told him everything he needed to know. Marco, I need to see you. We need to talk about this divorce, about Austin, about what happens next. Come home. We'll talk. An hour later, Marla sat in their living room, clutching a cup of coffee with shaking hands. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. Marco, I know you hate me right now, but I need you to understand something. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant for Austin to get hurt. But it did happen, and now there are consequences. What kind of consequences? Marco sat across from her, his expression calm but implacable. The police investigation is going to conclude that Austin was injured due to parental negligence. Child Services is going to recommend supervised visitation for you and a restraining order against Kaiser. The divorce court is going to see you as an unfit mother who abandoned her child for an affair. Marla's face crumpled. What about the money? The assets? I'll need something to live on. Marla, did you honestly think I was going to reward you for cheating on me? Did you think I'd just hand over half of everything I built so you could start a new life with your boyfriend? It's not about the money. It's exactly about the money. Kaiser's gambling debts, his pressure for you to file for divorce, his promises that everything would work out once you got your settlement. It's all about money. Marco pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. It displayed a text message from an unknown number. Your boyfriend owes us $60,000. Payment is due Friday. We know where you live. Marla stared at the message in horror. Marco, what is this? This is what happens when you get involved with a gambling addict who owes money to dangerous people. They've been watching Kaiser, following him, learning about his life. And now they know about you. But I don't have that kind of money. No, but they think you will. After the divorce settlement, Marla looked up at him with desperate eyes. Marco, please. You have to help me. These people, they're dangerous. Marco studied his wife's face, seeing the fear and desperation there. For a moment, he almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Marla, I want you to understand something. You and Kaiser created this situation. You put my son at risk, you violated my trust, and you tried to steal my assets. Now you're asking me to protect you from the consequences. I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever papers you want. I'll give up all claims to the assets. Just please don't let them hurt me. Marco was quiet for a long moment, as if considering her offer. Finally, he spoke. There might be a way to handle this, but it would require you to do exactly what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it. No questions, no arguments, no attempts to protect Kaiser. Anything. Tomorrow, you're going to call Kaiser and tell him you've been in touch with a divorce lawyer. You're going to tell him that the lawyer thinks you can get a large settlement, but it's going to take time to work through the legal process. How long? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Marla nodded quickly. Okay. And then what? Marco's smile was cold and predatory. Then we find out exactly what your boyfriend is willing to do when he's desperate. Chapter 5. Pressure Points. The Cumberland Pharmaceuticals office building stood 23 stories tall in the heart of downtown, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. From his car, parked across the street, Marco watched employees hurrying into the building, coffee cups in hand, briefcases swinging at their sides. At exactly 8:47 a.m., Donnie Kaiser emerged from the parking garage and walked toward the building entrance. Even from a distance, Marco could see the tension in the man's shoulders, the way he kept checking his phone, the nervous energy that spoke of a man running out of options. Marco's own phone buzzed with a text from Aaron English. Security footage confirms Kay was at your house Tuesday, 7:30 to 9:45 p.m. Also, his company is launching an internal investigation today. Perfect timing. At 9:15 a.m., Marco entered the Cumberland Pharmaceuticals building and took the elevator to the 15th floor. The receptionist, a young woman with auburn hair and a professional smile, looked up as he approached. Good morning. I'm here to see Arthur Ayers, the regional sales director. I'm Marco Allen from Allen Construction. Do you have an appointment, Mr. Allen? No, but I think Mr. Ayers will want to see me. It's regarding one of his sales managers, Donnie Kaiser. The receptionist's expression flickered with recognition. Let me check with Mr. Ayers' assistant. 5 minutes later, Marco was seated in a corner office facing a thin man in his 50s with prematurely gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent his career managing difficult situations. Mr. Allen, I understand you have information about one of my employees? Marco placed a manila folder on the desk. Mr. Ayers, I believe Donnie Kaiser has been using company resources for personal activities. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, expenses that don't align with legitimate business purposes. Arthur Ayers opened the folder and examined the hotel receipts and credit card statements Aaron had compiled. His expression grew increasingly grim. Mr. Allen, how did you come by this information? Mr. Kaiser has been having an affair with my wife. These are copies of receipts from their meetings. As you can see, many of them were charged to what appears to be a company credit card. Ayers studied the documents more carefully. The Riverside Inn, the downtown Marriott, several restaurants. Mr. Allen, these charges total nearly $8,000 over 6 months. That's just what I could document. There may be more. What exactly are you asking me to do with this information? Marco leaned back in his chair. Nothing. I'm simply providing you with information that might be relevant to your company's internal policies. What you do with it is entirely your decision. Ayers was quiet for a moment. Mr. Allen, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Company policy is very clear about misuse of corporate resources. I understand completely. Will you be filing charges for fraud? Marco pretended to consider this. That depends on several factors. If Mr. Kaiser takes responsibility for his actions and makes appropriate restitution, I might be willing to consider alternative resolutions. What kind of restitution? Full repayment of the misused funds, plus interest, and a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing that could be used in my divorce proceedings. Ayers nodded slowly. I'll need to discuss this with our legal department, but I think we can work something out. As Marco left the Cumberland Pharmaceuticals building, his phone rang. It was Marla, and she sounded panicked. Marco, Donnie just called. He's been suspended from his job, pending an investigation. They're accusing him of embezzlement. That's unfortunate. Marco, did I what, Marla? Did you have something to do with this? Marco was quiet for a moment. Marla, are you asking me if I reported evidence of criminal activity to the appropriate authorities? Yes, I did. Your boyfriend has been stealing from his company to pay for hotel rooms where he could fuck my wife. Oh God. Marco, what's going to happen to him? That depends on whether he cooperates with the investigation and makes full restitution. It also depends on whether criminal charges are filed. Criminal charges? Embezzlement is a felony. Marla, $8,000 in misappropriated corporate funds. That's serious prison time. The line was quiet except for the sound of Marla crying. There might be a way to minimize the damage, Marco continued. But it would require Kaiser to be completely honest about his activities, his debts, and his intentions regarding our marriage. What do you mean? I mean, he needs to provide a full confession about the affair, his gambling problems, and his plan to use our divorce settlement to pay his debts. In writing, signed and witnessed. And if he does that, then I might be willing to work with Cumberland Pharmaceuticals on a restitution agreement instead of pursuing criminal charges. Another long silence. Marco, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Those men who've been asking questions about Donnie, the ones who threatened him about his gambling debts, did you arrange that? Marco smiled, though she couldn't see it. Marla, your boyfriend owes $60,000 to a loan shark. That's not something I arranged. That's something he did to himself. But the timing is because his creditors are getting impatient. They want their money, and they've been told that Kaiser is about to come into a large sum through his girlfriend's divorce settlement. Who told them that? Kaiser did. He's been bragging about it for weeks. At 2 p.m., Marco met with Detective Tanner at the police station. The detective had called that morning requesting another interview, and Marco suspected he knew why. Mr. Allen, we've completed our investigation into your son's injury. Based on the evidence, we're not pursuing criminal charges for child abuse. That's good to hear. However, we are recommending that Child Services maintain supervision of Austin's living situation until certain issues are resolved. What kind of issues? Detective Tanner consulted his notes. Your wife's inconsistent statements about Tuesday evening, evidence of an extramarital affair, and questions about the supervision of your son during the time of his injury. Marco nodded gravely. Detective, I want what's best for Austin. If that means supervised visitation for Marla until she can prove she's prioritizing his safety, then I support that decision. There's another matter we need to discuss. We've received information about potential fraud involving Mr. Kaiser's employment. Are you planning to file charges? That depends on whether Mr. Kaiser is willing to cooperate with resolving the situation. I'm more interested in protecting my family's assets than in sending anyone to prison. I understand. However, if Cumberland Pharmaceuticals decides to file charges, that decision won't be up to you. Of course not. After leaving the police station, Marco drove to his lawyer's office. Samuel Stanton was a sharp-dressed man in his 60s who specialized in divorce and family law. His office walls were lined with law books and framed photographs of successful cases. Marco, I've reviewed the documentation your investigator provided. This is about as clear-cut a case of adultery as I've ever seen. What kind of settlement can we expect? Given the evidence of infidelity, the child endangerment issues, and the apparent conspiracy to defraud marital assets, I'd say you're looking at full custody of Austin, minimal or no alimony from Marla, and retention of virtually all marital property. Marco leaned forward. What about Kaiser's involvement? Can we pursue him legally? Alienation of affection is still recognized in this state. We could potentially sue Kaiser for damages related to the destruction of your marriage. Given his apparent financial difficulties, it might not be worth pursuing monetarily, but would create additional legal pressure. Do it. I want him buried under legal problems. Consider it done. That evening, Marco returned home to find Marla pacing the living room with her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking in urgent whispers, but hung up quickly when she saw him. That was Donnie, she said. Marco, he's falling apart. He's been suspended without pay. His landlord is threatening eviction, and those men you mentioned, they came to his apartment again. What do they want? Money. They gave him until Friday to come up with $20,000, or they're going to start breaking things. Starting with his legs. Marco sat down and loosened his tie. That's unfortunate. Marco, please. I know you hate us both, but you can't just let them hurt him. Marla, I want you to understand something. Donnie Kaiser made a series of choices. He chose to gamble away money he didn't have. He chose to borrow from dangerous people. He chose to seduce a married woman. He chose to steal from his company. And he chose to put our son at risk. Marco's voice grew colder. Now he's facing the consequences of those choices. That's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to fix. But you could help him. You could loan him the money. Why would I do that? Because Marla struggled for words. Because you're a good man. Because you wouldn't want to see anyone hurt, even someone who wronged you. Marco studied his wife's face. Even now, after everything that had happened, she was trying to manipulate him into saving her lover. Marla, let me make something very clear. Donnie Kaiser is going to face the full consequences of his actions. He's going to lose his job, possibly face criminal charges, and deal with his creditors however he can. You're going to face the consequences of your actions, too. What does that mean? It means you're going to help me make sure he understands exactly how hopeless his situation is. Marla's face went pale. What are you talking about? Marco pulled out his phone and showed her a text message. Meet me tomorrow at the Riverside Inn. Room 237. We need to talk about our future. D, you're going to meet him, Marco said, and you're going to deliver a message for me. Chapter 6. The Squeeze. The Riverside Inn sat on the outskirts of town like a monument to mediocrity, its faded brick facade and neon vacancy sign speaking to the kind of establishment that asked no questions and kept no records. Marco sat in his truck in the parking lot, watching the second-floor windows where he knew room 237 was located. At exactly 3 p.m., Marla's Honda Civic pulled into the lot. Through his binoculars, Marco watched his wife sit in her car for several minutes, clearly steeling herself for what was to come. She looked like she'd aged a decade in the past week. Her usually perfect blonde hair was unwashed and pulled back in a ponytail. Her face was pale and drawn, and her hands shook as she checked her phone one more time. Finally, she got out of her car and walked toward the motel stairs. Marco's phone buzzed with a text from Aaron English, who was positioned on the other side of the building. Kay arrived 10 minutes ago. Looks like he hasn't slept in days. This was the critical moment. Everything Marco had built over the past week. The police investigation, the job suspension, the pressure from creditors, the legal threats, All of it was designed to bring Donnie Kaiser to this point of maximum desperation. 30 minutes later, Marla emerged from the motel room. Even from a distance, Marco could see she was crying. Her phone rang immediately, and Marco answered on the first ring. "How did it go?" "Marco, please don't make me do this." Marla's voice was thick with tears. He's not the same person. He's desperate and angry and scared. When I told him there wasn't going to be any divorce settlement money, he grabbed me. Did he hurt you?" "Not physically. But Marco, he's talking about running away, about taking money from somewhere, about doing something desperate. I think he might hurt himself. Or someone else." The silence stretched between them. "Marla, did you deliver my message exactly as I told you?" "Yes. I told him that you knew about everything, that you had evidence, that the divorce wasn't going to result in any money for me. I told him that criminal charges were being filed for the embezzlement, and that his creditors knew he wasn't going to be able to pay." "And how did he react?" "He started talking about the construction company, about your assets, about how it wasn't fair that you got to keep everything while he lost everything. Marco, I think he might try to do something to your business." Marco had been expecting this. A desperate man with nothing left to lose was predictable in his unpredictability. Kaiser would either run, which would solve the problem permanently, or he would lash out, which would provide Marco with the justification he needed for the final phase of his plan. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. He left right after I did." "Marco, what if he goes to the police? What if he tells them about your meetings with those loan shark people?" Marco almost smiled. Even now, Marla was thinking about protecting herself rather than considering the broader implications. "Marla, if Kaiser goes to the police and claims that I somehow conspired with his creditors, what exactly do you think he's going to tell them? That he borrowed money from criminals to pay gambling debts, then try to steal from his company and destroy my marriage to get money to pay them back? But if they investigate, they'll find exactly what I want them to find. Documentation of Kaiser's debts, evidence of his theft, records of his affair with you, and proof that he endangered our son. They'll find a desperate criminal who's trying to blame everyone else for his problems." That evening, Marco was reviewing work schedules in his home office when his security system alerted him to movement in the driveway. Through his window, he could see a figure moving around his truck, partially obscured by the shadows from the oak trees that lined his property. Marco slipped out the back door and circled around the house, moving quietly through the darkness. As he approached his truck, he could see someone crouched beside the driver's side, working at something with a small tool. It was Donnie Kaiser, and he was slashing tires. Marco watched for a moment, letting Kaiser finish his work. When the man stood up and turned toward the house, Marco stepped out of the shadows. "Going somewhere, Donnie?" Kaiser spun around, a tire iron clutched in his hand. In the dim light from the street lamp, Marco could see that his wife's lover looked like hell. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, his face was unshaven, and his eyes had the wild look of a man who'd been awake for too long. "You son of a bitch," Kaiser said, raising the tire iron. "You destroyed my life." Marco didn't move, didn't show any sign of fear or aggression. "No, Donnie, you destroyed your own life. I just documented it. You set me up. You arranged everything. The investigation at work, the pressure from Rosales' people, all of it. I arranged nothing. You stole from your company. You borrowed money from criminals. You seduced my wife and endangered my son. I just made sure the right people had the right information at the right time." Kaiser took a step closer, the tire iron raised. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won. I think you're a gambling addict and a thief who's facing the consequences of his actions." "Consequences?" Kaiser laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about consequences? Fine. Let's talk about what happens when I tell everyone that Marco Allen hired criminals to threaten me. Let's talk about what happens when I tell them about your meetings with Rosales." Marco pulled out his phone and held it up so Kaiser could see the screen. It showed a video recording that had been running for the past 3 minutes. "You mean this conversation? Where you just admitted to vandalizing my property while carrying a weapon and threatening me on my own land?" Kaiser's face went white. "You're recording this?" "I've been recording everything, Donnie. Every conversation, every meeting, every interaction. Just like I recorded my meetings with Rosales, where I provided him with factual information about your debts and your claims about accessing my assets through my wife. Marco stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You see, that's the difference between us. I plan ahead. I document everything. I think through the consequences of my actions before I take them. You can't prove. I can prove you stole from your company. I can prove you were at my house the night my son was injured. I can prove you've been pressuring my wife to file for divorce so you could access assets that don't belong to you. And now I can prove you came to my home with a weapon and vandalized my property. Kaiser's grip on the tire iron loosened. What do you want? I want you to understand that your situation is hopeless. You owe money you can't pay to people who don't accept excuses. You're facing criminal charges for embezzlement. You have no job, no income, and no prospects. Your only choice is to disappear. I can't just disappear. Rosales' people will find me. Maybe, but that's not my problem. Kaiser stared at him for a long moment, then dropped the tire iron. You're a cold son of a bitch. You know that. I'm a man who protects what's his. And Marla? What happens to her? Marco's expression hardened. Marla chose you over her family. She chose your problems over her son's safety. She'll live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of her life. Kaiser turned and walked toward his car, but stopped at the edge of the driveway. This isn't over, Marco. Yes, it is. After Kaiser drove away, Marco called Detective Tanner and reported the vandalism and threats. Within an hour, a patrol car was parked outside his house, and an APB had been issued for Kaiser's arrest. At midnight, Marco's phone rang. It was Aaron English. Marco, we have a problem. Kaiser just robbed a convenience store across town. He got away with about $400, but the whole thing was caught on camera. Marco felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Anyone hurt? No, but he had a gun. This is now an armed robbery investigation. Where do you think he's headed? If he's smart, out of state. If he's desperate, he might try something even more stupid. Marco looked out his window at the police car parked in his driveway. Aaron, I want you to make sure Rosales knows about the robbery. I want him to know that Kaiser is now a wanted criminal who's likely to draw police attention wherever he goes. That's a dangerous game, Marco. It's not a game at all. It's pest control. The next morning brought news that Donnie Kaiser had been arrested trying to cross the state line. He'd been pulled over for speeding, and the officer had recognized him from the APB. In his car, police found the stolen money, the gun used in the robbery, and a notebook containing detailed information about Marco's business, his home address, and his daily routines. Marco read the news report while drinking his morning coffee, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Kaiser was now facing charges for armed robbery, embezzlement, stalking, and vandalism. Even with a plea bargain, he was looking at serious prison time. But the game wasn't over yet. There was still Marla to deal with, and Marco had saved the best for last. Chapter 7. Final Calculations. The law offices of Stanton and Associates occupied the top 2 floors of the Meridian building downtown, their mahogany-paneled conference rooms and brass fixtures projecting the kind of old-money respectability that impressed judges and intimidated opposing counsel. Marco sat at the head of the polished conference table, his hands folded calmly as he watched his soon-to-be ex-wife sign document after document. Marla looked broken. Her designer clothes hung loosely on her frame. She'd lost at least 15 pounds over the past month, and her once-perfect manicure was now bitten down to the quick. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and her hand shook slightly as she signed away her rights to everything she'd once taken for granted. The final custody agreement, Samuel Stanton announced, sliding another document across the table. Mr. Allen will have full legal and physical custody of Austin. Mrs. Allen will have supervised visitation every other Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., supervised by a court-appointed monitor. Marla's lawyer, a nervous young man named Matt Hanna who'd been assigned to her case through legal aid, cleared his throat. Mrs. Allen, you don't have to agree to these terms. We could fight for joint custody. With what? Marla's voice was barely above a whisper. I have no money for a prolonged legal battle, no job, no assets. Marco has documented evidence of adultery, child endangerment, and poor judgment. Any judge who reviews this case will see exactly what Marco wants them to see. She looked across the table at her husband, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and resignation. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Marco's expression remained neutral. I've simply documented the truth, Marla. You made choices, and now you're living with the consequences. The property settlement, Stanton continued, awards all real estate, business assets, retirement accounts, and investments to Mr. Allen. Mrs. Allen will receive her personal belongings and the Honda Civic, which is paid for. What about alimony? Matt Hanna asked weakly. Given Mrs. Allen's adultery and the documented evidence of her conspiracy to defraud marital assets, the court has waived any alimony claims, Stanton replied. However, Mr. Allen has agreed to provide her with $5,000 to assist with relocation expenses. Marla signed the final document and pushed it across the table. There. Are you satisfied now? Marco studied his wife's face for a moment. Once, he'd loved this woman enough to build a life with her, to trust her with his heart and his future. Now, looking at her defeated expression, he felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Almost, he said quietly. What do you mean, almost? Marco nodded to Stanton, who opened another folder. There's one more matter to address, the lawyer said. The criminal conspiracy charges. The color drained from Marla's face. What criminal charges? Conspiracy to commit fraud, Marco said. You and Kaiser conspired to defraud me of marital assets. You provided him with confidential financial information about my business. You participated in a plan to obtain money through false pretenses. But the divorce settlement is a civil matter. The criminal conspiracy is a separate issue entirely. Matt Hanna leaned forward frantically. Mr. Allen, your wife has cooperated fully with these proceedings. She's given up any claim to assets, agreed to minimal custody. She's done what any rational person would do when caught red-handed, Marco interrupted. But cooperation in divorce proceedings doesn't erase criminal activity. Marla stared at him in horror. Marco, you can't be serious. After everything I've already lost, you want to send me to prison? I want justice for what you did to our son. I want accountability for your betrayal. And I want to make sure you never have the opportunity to do this to another family. Stanton slid a final document across the table. However, Mr. Allen is prepared to be reasonable. This is a cooperation agreement. If Mrs. Allen agrees to provide full testimony about Kaiser's gambling debts, his pressure tactics, and his plan to use divorce proceeds to pay his creditors, Mr. Allen will recommend that charges be filed only against Kaiser. You want me to testify against Donnie? I want you to tell the truth about what happened. Under oath. On the record. Marla looked at her lawyer, who shrugged helplessly. Mrs. Allen, if Mr. Allen follows through with conspiracy charges, you could be looking at significant prison time. This agreement would allow you to avoid prosecution entirely. What would I have to testify to? Marco answered directly. That Kaiser pressured you to file for divorce, specifically to gain access to my assets. That he provided you with specific information about his gambling debts and his need for money. That he was present in our home the night Austin was injured. And that you both prioritize your sexual encounter over our son's safety. And if I refuse, then you'll face the full consequences of your actions. Criminal charges, prison time, and a felony record that will follow you for the rest of your life. The silence in the conference room stretched for several minutes. Finally, Marla spoke. If I sign this, if I testify, what happens to me afterwards? You'll be free to rebuild your life however you see fit. But you'll do it somewhere else. The cooperation agreement includes a provision that you relocate at least 500 miles away and have no contact with me or Austin except for court-supervised visitation. You're banishing me. I'm giving you a chance to start over. It's more than you deserve. Marla picked up the pen with shaking hands and signed the cooperation agreement. 2 weeks later, Marco sat in the gallery of the county courthouse as Marla took the witness stand in Donnie Kaiser's criminal trial. Kaiser had been denied bail due to the armed robbery charges, and his court-appointed attorney was fighting a losing battle against overwhelming evidence. Marla's testimony was devastating. She spoke clearly and directly about Kaiser's gambling addiction, his mounting debts, and his increasingly desperate attempts to access Marco's assets through their marriage. She described in detail how Kaiser had pressured her to file for divorce, how he provided her with specific dollar amounts he needed to pay his creditors, and how he'd been present in their home the night Austin was injured. "Mrs. Allen," the prosecutor asked, "did Mr. Kaiser ever express concern for your son's welfare?" "No," Marla replied, her voice steady. "When Austin was hurt, Donnie's only concern was that he might tell someone about seeing us together. He wanted to leave immediately before Marco came home." "And what was your response?" "I told him we needed to check on Austin first, make sure he was okay. But Donnie said it was just a bump on the head and that kids were resilient." From the defendant's table, Kaiser stared at Marla with undisguised hatred. His lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: armed robbery, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and child endangerment. The judge sentenced Kaiser to 12 years in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 8 years. As the bailiff led Kaiser away in shackles, he turned toward the gallery where Marco sat watching. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. Marco smiled and mouthed back, "Yes, it is." After the trial, Marco met with Detective Tanner one final time to tie up loose ends. Kaiser's creditors have been notified that he won't be making any payments for the foreseeable future, the detective reported. Malcolm Rosales has apparently written off the debt as a loss and moved on to other business interests. And Marla, she's moving to Phoenix next week. New name, new job, new life. The cooperation agreement protects her from prosecution, but she'll be under federal supervision for the next 5 years. Marco nodded. "What about the custody arrangement?" "Austin is doing well in counseling. The supervised visitation with his mother seems to be helping him process what happened. The therapist thinks he'll make a full recovery, both physically and emotionally." "Good. That's all that matters." That evening, Marco sat on his front porch watching Austin play in the yard with a new soccer ball. His son's head wound had healed completely, leaving only a small scar that would fade with time. The boy's laughter filled the evening air, and Marco felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. Julius Lynch pulled into the driveway and walked up to the porch, carrying a folder of paperwork from the business. "Boss, the insurance settlement came through on the equipment that was vandalized," he reported. "Full replacement value plus compensation for lost productivity." "Excellent. And the Riverside project?" "Finished 2 days ahead of schedule. The client is so happy they're talking about hiring us for their next 3 developments." Marco smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. "Julius, take tomorrow off. Take your wife somewhere nice for dinner. You've earned it." As his foreman drove away, Marco's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, he tensed, wondering if somehow Kaiser or his associates had found a way to reach him from prison. But the message was from Aaron English. Marla's flight to Phoenix departed on schedule. No issues. Case officially closed. Marco deleted the message and put his phone away. He called Austin over to the porch, and they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. "Dad," Austin said quietly, "is Mommy ever coming back?" Marco put his arm around his son's shoulders. "She'll visit sometimes, buddy, but she made some bad choices, and now she has to live somewhere else. Because she hurt me, because she forgot that families are supposed to protect each other. But you don't have to worry about that anymore. It's just you and me now, and I'll always protect you." Austin leaned against his father's side. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, son." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marco reflected on the events of the past month. Some people might call what he'd done excessive, even cruel. But those people had never been betrayed by someone they trusted, never watched their child suffer because of someone else's selfishness, never had to rebuild their life from the ashes of someone else's lies. Marco Allen had learned long ago that the world was divided into 2 kinds of people: those who built things up and those who tore things down. He'd spent his life building, his business, his home, his family. When someone had tried to tear down what he'd built, he'd responded with the same methodical precision he brought to every construction project. He'd identified the problem, gathered the right tools, and systematically dismantled the threat until nothing remained but rubble. And now, sitting on his porch with his son's safe beside him, Marco knew that he'd built something that would last. A life free from the poison of betrayal, a future built on truth instead of lies, and a legacy that would protect his son for years to come. Some people might call it revenge. Marco called it justice. And justice, like a well-built foundation, was designed to endure. Chapter 8. Cleanup Operations. 6 months after the trial, Marco stood in the marble lobby of the First National Bank building, watching as the electronic board displayed the morning's interest rates and market indicators. The meeting he was about to attend would finalize the last piece of his reconstruction project, and like every other aspect of his methodical campaign, it had been planned down to the smallest detail. Austin was in school now, thriving in his new routine. The boy had adapted remarkably well to their new life. No more walking on eggshells around his mother's moods. No more confusion about why mommy's friend was always visiting when daddy wasn't home. The child psychologist had pronounced Austin's recovery complete, noting that children were often more resilient than adults when removed from toxic situations. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, and Marco walked down the carpeted hallway to the offices of Morrison Financial. This was where Marla had claimed to work late so many evenings, and where Marco was now about to conclude a business deal that would eliminate the last potential complications from his former wife's betrayal. Julian Good rose from behind his mahogany desk as Marco entered the corner office. At 62, Good was everything Marco had expected from Marla's description. Silver-haired, expensively dressed, and possessed of the kind of practiced charm that wealthy men use to navigate delicate situations. "Mr. Allen, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Please have a seat." Marco settled into the leather chair across from Good's desk and studied the man who had been Marla's boss during her affair. "Mr. Good, when you called last week, you mentioned there were some lingering issues related to my ex-wife's employment here." "Yes, unfortunately there are." Good opened a file folder and consulted several documents. "As you know, Marla was terminated from her position here following her arrest. However, during our internal investigation, we discovered some irregularities that we felt you should be aware of." Marco kept his expression neutral. "What kind of irregularities?" "Access to client files, printing of confidential documents, unusual computer activity during non-business hours. It appears that Marla may have been gathering information about high-net-worth clients, possibly for purposes related to her personal situation." This was news to Marco, though he didn't let his surprise show. During his campaign against Kaiser and Marla, he'd focused on their direct actions, the affair, the conspiracy, the child endangerment. He hadn't investigated whether Marla might have been attempting to steal client information for additional leverage. "What kind of information?" "Asset valuations, investment portfolios, estate planning documents. The kind of information that could be valuable to someone planning to file for divorce or someone looking to assess potential targets for fraud." Good slid a thick folder across the desk. "We've compiled everything we found. Copies of documents she accessed, logs of her computer activity, records of files she printed or downloaded." "Mr. Allen, I need to ask, did your ex-wife ever mention our clients or their financial situations?" Marco reviewed the documents, his mind racing. Marla had access to detailed financial information about dozens of wealthy individuals and families. If she'd been planning to use this information as leverage in their divorce, or if she'd shared it with Kaiser as part of their conspiracy, the implications were staggering. "Mr. Good, some of these clients, these are very prominent people." "Exactly. Which is why we need to handle this situation very carefully. If word gets out that client confidentiality was breached, it could destroy our reputation and expose us to massive liability." Marco understood immediately why Good had called him. Morrison Financial needed to contain this situation, and Marco was the key to their strategy. "What are you proposing?" Good leaned forward. "We're prepared to offer you a consulting contract with our firm, a substantial retainer to help us assess and mitigate any potential security breaches in our systems. In exchange, We would ask for your discretion regarding these documents and your assistance in ensuring that any information your ex-wife may have obtained doesn't surface in the future. The offer was elegant in its simplicity. Morrison Financial would pay Marco a significant sum to essentially buy his silence about Marla's activities, while also giving him access to high-net-worth clients who might need construction services. Marco would gain financially while helping the firm protect itself for the consequences of his ex-wife's crimes. How substantial a retainer are we discussing? $200,000 annually for the next 3 years, with a possibility of renewal, plus bonuses for specific consulting projects. Marco considered the offer. $600,000 was serious money, enough to expand his business significantly or to secure Austin's college education. But more importantly, it would give him leverage over any future attempts by Marla or her associates to cause trouble. Mr. Good, I appreciate the offer, but I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Was Marla working alone, or was someone else involved in accessing this information? Our investigation suggests she was working alone, but we can't be certain. The computer logs show that most of the unauthorized access occurred during evening hours when the building was mostly empty. Evening hours when she was supposedly working late. Exactly. Marco made his decision. I'll accept your consulting contract, Mr. Good, but I have some additional requirements. What kind of requirements? I want full access to your security footage from the past year. I want copies of all documents Marla accessed or printed. And I want a complete list of any external contacts she may have had while working here. Good hesitated. Mr. Allen, that's quite extensive. May I ask why you need such detailed information? Because if my ex-wife was stealing confidential information from your clients, there's a possibility she wasn't acting entirely on her own. I want to make sure that all potential threats to your firm's reputation are identified and neutralized. The implication was clear. Marco might be able to help Morrison Financial not just contain the damage from Marla's activities, but also identify and eliminate any other potential problems. I think we can accommodate those requests, Good said finally. 2 hours later, Marco sat in his truck in the Morrison Financial parking garage, reviewing the documents Good had provided. The scope of Marla's activities was broader than he'd imagined. She'd accessed files on over 40 clients, including several whose names Marco recognized from the newspaper society pages. But one name jumped out at him, Alberto Wilkerson. Wilkerson was a real estate developer who'd been competing with Allen Construction for several major projects over the past 2 years. He was also, according to the files, a client whose investment portfolio included significant holdings in casino and entertainment properties. Marco's phone rang. It was Aaron English. Aaron, I need you to do some research for me. Alberto Wilkerson. I want to know everything about his business dealings, his associates, and any connections he might have to gambling or loan shark operations. What's this about, Marco? Insurance. I want to make sure there are no other surprises waiting for me. That evening, Marco picked up Austin from his after-school program and drove home through the familiar streets of their neighborhood. The boy chattered excitedly about his day. A successful presentation in social studies, a goal scored during recess soccer, plans for a classmate's birthday party on the weekend. It was the kind of normal, healthy childhood conversation that Marco had feared might be lost forever during the chaos of the past year. But Austin had proven remarkably resilient, adapting to their new life with the flexibility that children possessed when removed from toxic situations. Dad, can we have pizza for dinner tonight? Sure, buddy, but you have to eat some vegetables too. Can we get the pizza with the vegetables on it? Marco smiled. That's a good compromise. As they pulled into their driveway, Marco noticed a car parked across the street that he didn't recognize. A dark sedan with tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that professional investigators or security personnel preferred. Marco's instincts, honed by months of careful planning and execution, immediately went on alert. He parked in the garage and walked Austin into the house through the connecting door, then moved to the front window to observe the sedan. It sat there for 20 minutes before driving away. Marco called Aaron English immediately. Aaron, I need surveillance detection on my house and office. Someone's watching me, and I want to know who and why. On it. Marco, any idea what this might be about? Maybe. I'll know more tomorrow. The next morning brought answers. Aaron called while Marco was reviewing job site reports in his office. The sedan belongs to a private security firm called Steele Investigations. They specialize in corporate security and asset protection. Their client list includes some very high-end individuals and businesses. Any connection to Morrison Financial or Alberto Wilkerson? Not directly. But get this, Steele Investigations was hired last week by someone to conduct a background investigation on you. The contract was paid for in cash, and the client information is sealed. Marco felt the familiar cold clarity that came when a new threat emerged. Someone with serious resources was investigating him, which meant someone believed he posed a threat to their interests. Aaron, I want you to find out who hired Steele Investigations. Use whatever resources you need. Marco, that's going to be expensive and potentially dangerous. These aren't amateurs we're dealing with. Neither am I. That afternoon, Marco made a decision that would have surprised his enemies. He called Detective Tanner and requested a meeting. Detective, I have reason to believe that I'm being investigated by parties unknown, possibly in connection with my ex-wife's criminal activities. I want to cooperate fully with any official investigation, but I also want protection from any unofficial activities. Tanner leaned back in his chair. What kind of unofficial activities? The kind that involve cash payments to private investigators and surveillance of my home, where my 7-year-old son lives. Marco, do you have any idea who might be interested in investigating you? I have suspicions, but I prefer to let the evidence speak for itself. Marco slid a copy of the Morrison financial documents across the desk. Detective, I think you're going to find this very interesting reading. As Tanner reviewed the evidence of Marla's theft of confidential client information, Marco felt the familiar satisfaction of a plan coming together. By bringing the police into the situation, he was transforming what could have been a private conflict into an official investigation. And official investigations, as Marco had learned, were much easier to control than private vendettas. Chapter 9, Permanent Foundation. 1 year later, Marco stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his new office on the 20th floor of the Meridian building, looking down at the city where he'd built his empire and destroyed his enemies. Allen Construction now occupied an entire floor of the prestigious downtown tower, with contracts worth over $50 million and a reputation for precision and reliability that was unmatched in the region. Austin, now 8 years old, sat at the conference table doing his homework while Marco finished reviewing the quarterly financial reports. The boy had grown taller and more confident over the past year, his easy smile and quick wit showing no lasting trauma from the events that had reshaped their lives. Dad, Mrs. Rodriguez wants to know if you can come to Career Day next week, Austin said, looking up from his math worksheet. Of course, buddy. What should I tell the class about construction? Tell them about how you build things that last forever. Marco smiled at his son's choice of words. Building things that lasted forever had indeed become his specialty, though not always in ways that Austin could understand. The phone rang, and Marco answered to find Samuel Stanton on the line. Marco, I have the final report on the Morrison financial situation. You're going to want to hear this. Go ahead. Alberto Wilkerson has been arrested on federal racketeering charges. Turns out he was laundering money for organized crime through his real estate deals and casino investments. The evidence that broke the case? Financial documents that were stolen from Morrison Financial and anonymously provided to the FBI. Marco absorbed this information with satisfaction. When Aaron English's investigation had revealed that Wilkerson was the one having Marco surveilled, it had taken only a small leap of logic to realize that Wilkerson must have been involved in the criminal activities that Marla had inadvertently uncovered. Any connection to our situation? The FBI believes Wilkerson was concerned that you might have access to the stolen Morrison financial documents and might eventually discover his money laundering operation. He was conducting surveillance to assess the threat level. And Marla? Wilkerson apparently never knew that she was the one who accessed his files. He thought the leak came from a disgruntled employee or a business rival. Your ex-wife's activities were just the catalyst that exposed a much larger criminal enterprise. Marco looked out at the city skyline, where several buildings bore the Allen Construction logo. What about our consulting contract with Morrison Financial? Still active and very profitable. Julian Good considers you something of a hero for helping expose the security breach that led to Wilkerson's arrest. I wouldn't be surprised if they offer you additional contracts. After hanging up with Stanton, Marco walked over to the conference table where Austin was finishing his homework. All done, buddy? Yep. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Austin's expression grew serious. Do you ever think about Mommy? Marco considered his answer carefully. Over the past year, Austin had occasionally asked about Marla, though the questions had become less frequent as time passed. The supervised visits had ended 6 months ago when Marla had failed to appear for 3 consecutive appointments, apparently having decided that starting fresh in Phoenix was more important than maintaining a relationship with her son. Sometimes, Marco said honestly, "Do you?" Sometimes, but not in a sad way anymore. More like remembering a story someone told me once. Marco was struck by the wisdom in his son's observation. Marla had indeed become like a story, something that had happened to them rather than something that continued to affect their daily lives. That's a good way to think about it, Austin. The past is just a story. What matters is what we build going forward. That evening, after Austin had gone to bed, Marco sat in his home office reviewing the final documents from his year-long reconstruction project. Every loose end had been tied up, every potential threat had been neutralized, every enemy had been defeated or eliminated. Donnie Kaiser was serving his 12-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, his appeals exhausted and his former associates having moved on to other business interests. Marla had built a new life in Phoenix under her maiden name, working as a receptionist for a medical practice and living in a modest apartment that reflected her reduced circumstances. Alberto Wilkerson was facing decades in federal prison for racketeering and money laundering. And Marco? Marco had emerged from the wreckage of his marriage stronger, wealthier, and more secure than ever before. His phone buzzed with a text message from Aaron English. Final surveillance sweep completed. No threats detected. All targets neutralized. Contract complete. Marco deleted the message and powered down his phone. Aaron had been conducting quarterly security assessments for the past year, ensuring that no new threats emerged from the ashes of the old ones. But this would be the last such assessment. The war was over, and Marco had won completely. He walked upstairs to check on Austin, finding his son sleeping peacefully in his bed, a soccer ball clutched in his arms and a smile on his face. This was what victory looked like, not the destruction of his enemies, but the protection of what mattered most. Marco had learned something important during his campaign of calculated revenge. Destruction was easy, but construction required patience, skill, and vision. Anyone could tear something down in a moment of rage or desperation. But building something that would last, whether it was a skyscraper, a business, or a life, required the kind of methodical precision that most people couldn't sustain. 6 months later, Marco received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from Phoenix publication. Local woman dies in car accident. Marla Petty, 34, was killed instantly when her vehicle collided with a semi-truck on Interstate 10 during a rainstorm. Police report that alcohol may have been a factor. Ms. Petty is survived by a son in another state. Marco read the clipping twice, then burned it in his fireplace. He felt no satisfaction at the news, no sense of victory or vindication. Marla's death was simply the final punctuation mark on a story that had ended long ago. Austin never learned about his mother's death. When the boy stopped asking about her entirely, Marco made the decision that some information was better left buried. Austin's life was full of soccer practice, school friends, construction site visits, and 1,000 small joys of childhood free from adult complications. On Austin's 9th birthday, Marco hosted a party in their backyard for 20 of the boys' classmates. As he watched his son laugh and play with his friends, Marco reflected on the man he'd become over the past 2 years. Some people might call him ruthless or vindictive. Others might say he'd gone too far in his pursuit of justice. But Marco knew the truth. He was simply a man who protected what belonged to him, who built things that lasted, and who never forgot that actions had consequences. Julius Lynch approached him during the party, carrying a beer and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who'd helped build something important. "Boss, I've got to say, seeing Austin this happy, it makes everything worthwhile. Marco nodded, watching his son kick a soccer ball with his friends. Julius, can I ask you something? Do you think I did the right thing? The older man was quiet for a moment. Marco, I've been in construction for 35 years. I've seen a lot of buildings come and go, a lot of men succeed and fail. The ones who last, the ones who build things that endure, they're the ones who understand that a good foundation is everything. Julius gestured toward Austin, who was now organizing his friends into teams for a game. That boy has a solid foundation now. No cracks, no weak spots, no rut that's going to bring the whole structure down later. Whatever you had to do to build that foundation, well, that's between you and your conscience. Marco smiled. That's good enough for me. As the sun set over the city where Marco Allen had built his empire and protected his son, the sounds of children's laughter filled the air. It was the sound of innocence preserved, of safety secured, and of a future built on an unshakable foundation. Some men built monuments to their own glory. Others built walls to keep the world at bay. But Marco had built something more important than either. A life free from the poison of betrayal, a legacy of strength and protection, and a son who would grow up knowing that some things in this world were worth fighting for. And that, Marco knew, was a construction project that would last forever. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.